And really, we're looking at answering the question of whether this is or isn't super switching advice. So in this case, we've got Mr. Baggins. He's got 3 super funds and asks his advisor if that's a good idea to have 3 different super funds. His advisor takes a look at his situation, recommends consolidating these into super fund A. So the question that I want you to have a think about and answer here is this super switching advice? Now, you should now see a poll on the side of your screen, and we've got lots of people coming through with answers, so that's really good. I'll wait. Wait a couple of minutes, but everyone's jumping in very well. We'll wait probably another 30 seconds and just see what everyone's responses are. Looks like we've got most people's answers coming through now. And the answer to this one is yes, that this is a super switching situation. What determines that is that the client had choice. They had the 3 super funds. They were able to actually stay in to choose from any of the recommended super funds, and there was advice to consolidate these into one of those super funds. Super fund A could be one of the existing ones. It could be a totally new one as well. It doesn't particularly matter. So I shall close that off now, and you'll be able to see the results there. Actually, no, you won't, because I'm not going to hit share, but we'll keep moving through. So this would be super switching advice. Moving on to the next scenario, Mr. Baggins again, in a different situation. He's left his employer and has been informed that he can no longer be a member of the Thieves Industry Super Fund. I'm not sure if there would actually ever be a super fund like that, but it suits the scenario. He asks his advisor where he should put his super money. His advisor recommends super fund B. And the question again here is this, do you think this is super switching advice? So once again, let's go to the polls, and if you could put through your answer, and you can see that there's I guess what I would call a bit of a J.R.R. Tolkien theme coming out here. I've just finished reading The Hobbit again, where obviously Bilbo Baggins comes from, and then getting very excited about in December 2012 the first part of the movie comes out, so very much looking forward to that. That'd be one I'll recommend to everyone. I think you should get out and see that one. Okay, we'll wait a few more seconds, but thank you for your comments about my filling conversation. So I'll close that off now, but again, most people here have said that that this is not a super switching scenario, and that's right. What's happened here is the client doesn't have choice. He's left his employer, and he's no longer able to be a member of that industry super fund. He's had to exit out, so he doesn't have the choice to stay in there. Therefore, there wasn't switching advice. The advisor has provided advice on the target fund or the to fund, but because the client didn't have choice, there's no actual, it's not super switching advice. So a couple of simple scenarios there just to highlight what is and what isn't super switching. Getting on to demonstrating a reasonable basis for advice. Looking at the theory, and the theory of having a reasonable basis for super switching advice isn't really any different than other advice. It's, always comes back to the fundamentals of know your product and know your client. So in terms of super switching, again, and probably both of these are the same with any product advice, but know your client, get a good handle on the client's situation and their needs and objectives. And in terms of knowing your product, understand the features, costs, etc. of the current super fund, the client's from fund, and any that you might recommend. One key concept is that advice might be inappropriate where the overall benefits are lower and the costs are higher as a result of the advice. I'd highlight that that's not necessarily the case for the 2 points by themselves, because clients may be comfortable in trading costs for product features and vice versa, but where advisors recommend switching and there's no obvious overall advantage to the client in making the switch, we're more likely as a licensee and a compliance team, and ASIC has stated this as the regulator as well, that we're all more likely to look closely at the disclosure given to the client about conflicts of interest, fees, and the basis advice where that overall benefit isn't obvious to the client. So I'd say that it may be inappropriate, not necessarily is, but keep that in mind too. Really, the benefit to the client has to come through in the SOA, and we'll get into some examples of that shortly. So saying that, how do you demonstrate a reasonable basis for advice? Using the concepts of know your client, know your product, completing a fact find, and the fact find won't draw out all of the information that you actually need. It asks specific questions, asked about goals, but discussing, if you're looking specifically, if you know you're going to talk to clients about superannuation advice, discussing their products, the features with the clients will be very useful as well, and keeping file notes of those. Talking to the client about what do they like or dislike, do they know about the features in their super fund, and noting those down will help to build that basis of advice and show that you know your client. And knowing your product is really understanding, as I said before, the features and the costs and the benefits and the any risks and consequences that are associated with a particular super fund. So you could do that by reviewing the PDS. You may use software like Xplan Super Solver, Midwinter's Reasonable Basis. There's probably a couple of other products out in the market as well. I know Chant West uses its Applecheck software, so you've got a few different options there. So that's knowing your client and knowing your product in theory. Looking at the statement of advice. So let's have a look at what an SOA should include. To demonstrate a reasonable basis for super switching advice, advice documents must show, one, how the existing super fund was not able to meet the client's goals. So as I said before, you might do this by using the PDS, Super Solver, Applecheck, Reasonable Basis, anything like that. Also be specific on the client's goals and perhaps even the product features, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. To how the recommended super fund better meets the client's goals. So again, linking the product and the advice back to the goals. And the more detailed the goals are, the easier it is to show a reasonable basis. You also need to include a cost comparison, and typically that's an ongoing cost comparison. And again, we'll get into some examples of that, but really you're saying, here's what you'll pay in your current fund, in your from fund, and here's what you would pay in your to fund, in the recommended to fund. As with any product switching advice, you also need to highlight to the client what the consequences of switching products are, and we'll get into more detail